You have probably been told that prayer is a religious act, a spiritual discipline, something you do because you believe. But what if the specific way Jesus taught people to pray was also doing something measurable to the human brain? Something neuroscience is only now beginning to describe in its own language. What if the sequence he gave, the closed door, the shift of attention, the surrender, the release, was not only theology but also a precise method for moving a nervous system out of survival and into a state where clarity, trust, and peace become physically possible? That is what this video is about. Not to reduce prayer to biology, and not to explain God away, but to show you something that has been hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. The way Jesus prayed maps almost perfectly onto what we now understand about how the human brain calms itself, reorganizes its attention, and comes back into regulation. And once you see it, you may never rush through those words again. Let me be clear about what I am not saying. I am not saying prayer is just brain chemistry, that it is a trick, or that the sacred is only a set of neurons firing. I believe something real is happening between a person and God in prayer. What I am saying is that Jesus, when he taught people to pray, did not hand them a random collection of holy phrases. He gave them an order, a movement, a progression that begins by removing the exact things that keep a human being locked in stress, and ends by placing that person in a posture the body reads as safety. The theology and the neurology are not enemies. They are describing the same event from two directions. Before we go further, if this idea interests you, subscribe, because this channel exists at exactly this intersection, where the teachings of Jesus meet what science is discovering about the mind, the body, and the nervous system. And save this video because this is not something you absorb once. It is something you return to slowly, and each time you understand a little more of what is actually happening inside you when you pray. I also want you to know where this comes from. These reflections come from years of working with the human nervous system, with people trapped in anxiety, in survival states, in the kind of chronic stress that makes it almost impossible to feel close to anything, including God. And what became impossible to ignore over time was this. The people who learned to pray the way Jesus described, slowly, in the right order, were not just having a spiritual experience. Their bodies were changing visibly, in ways anyone in the room could see. Their breathing slowed. Their faces softened. The frantic quality left their words. Something in them came down out of alarm. Here is the problem this video solves. Most people were taught the words of the Lord's Prayer but never the movement underneath them. So they recite it the way you recite a phone number, quickly from memory, with the nervous system still running at full speed, still braced, still scanning for threat. And then they wonder why the prayer they have said 1,000 times does not seem to change anything inside them. It is not because the prayer is empty. It is because they are performing it in a state the prayer was specifically designed to bring them out of. You cannot arrive at stillness while sprinting, and you cannot receive rest while your whole body is braced for a blow. The words alone were never the point. The movement through the words was always the point, and the movement only works if you actually let it slow you down. In the minutes ahead, we are going to walk through what Jesus actually taught, movement by movement, and beside each movement I will show you what modern understanding of the brain and nervous system reveals about why that step matters. We will look at why he said to close the door before saying a single word. Why he began with relationship instead of request. Why reverence comes before urgency, surrender before need, release before protection. And you will start to see that this ancient sequence is, among other things, one of the most sophisticated descriptions of nervous system regulation ever written down, centuries before anyone had the vocabulary to name it. So take a breath before we begin, a real one, slower on the way out than on the way in. Because that single act, that longer exhale, is where the science and the sacred first touch, and it is exactly where Jesus, without any of our modern words, told people to start. A slower exhale sends a direct signal to the body that the danger has passed, that it is safe to soften, that the alarm can quiet. It is the simplest possible instruction for regulation, and it lives at the very doorway of prayer. Stay with me, because what you are about to understand may change not only how you pray, but what happens in your body every time you do. To understand why the way Jesus prayed was neurological, you first have to understand the state most people are actually in when they try to pray. The human nervous system has, in simple terms, two broad modes. One is a state of defense, the mode your body enters when it perceives threat, pressure, or danger. In this mode, your heart rate rises, your breathing becomes shallow and fast, your attention narrows, and your brain shifts resources toward survival and away from reflection, connection, and higher thought. The other is a state of safety, the mode your body enters when it perceives that it is protected, connected, and not under threat. In this state, your heart rate settles, your breathing deepens, and the parts of your brain responsible for perspective, trust, empathy, and calm come back online. Now here is the crucial part. In the modern world, most people spend enormous amounts of time in the first mode, the defense mode, without even realizing it. Not because a lion is chasing them, but because the nervous system does not distinguish clearly between a physical threat and a stream of emails, deadlines, conflicts, worries about money, replayed arguments, and imagined catastrophes about a future that has not arrived. The body treats all of it as danger. And a body that treats life as danger is a body that lives, day after day, in a low-grade version of survival. And here is the quiet tragedy of it all. This is the state most people carry into prayer. They sit down or kneel or bow their heads, but their nervous system is still scanning, still braced, still running the background program that says something is wrong and you must stay alert. And in that state, something important is happening in the brain. When the survival system is active, the regions associated with fear and threat detection are dominant, and the regions associated with reflection, connection, and calm reasoning are suppressed. This is not a character flaw. It is design. When your ancestor heard a branch snap in the dark, they did not need philosophy or warmth. They needed speed and vigilance. But it means that a person in a survival state is, quite literally, less able to access the very faculties that prayer is meant to engage. Trust is harder. Surrender feels dangerous. Stillness feels threatening rather than restful. This is why so many people say that prayer feels mechanical or empty, or like talking to the ceiling. It is not necessarily that their faith is weak or that God is absent. It is that they are attempting an act of trust and surrender while their body is convinced it is under attack, and a body convinced it is under attack does not surrender. It defends. Now watch what Jesus does. Before he gives a single word to say, before our Father, before any request, he addresses the state of the person praying. Go into your room. Close the door. Withdraw from the crowd, from the audience, from the performance, from the noise. In modern terms, he is removing the very inputs that keep the nervous system in defense mode. He is reducing the flood of external signals the body reads as demand and threat. He is creating the conditions of safety before asking for the posture of trust. He understood, without any of our language for it, that you cannot ask a frightened system to relax by force. You have to change its environment first. And there is more, because Jesus does not only remove the external audience. He removes the internal pressure too. He tells them their Father already knows what they need before they ask. Consider what that does to a nervous system braced to perform, to explain, to convince, to get it right. It removes the demand. There is no test to pass, no speech to deliver, no performance to nail. The pressure to produce the correct words, which is itself a subtle threat state, is lifted. You are not auditioning. You are arriving somewhere you are already known. For a nervous system, that specific message, you are already known and nothing is required of you, is one of the most profound safety signals a human being can receive. So before we even reach the words of the prayer, Jesus has done two things that any modern expert in stress and regulation would recognize immediately. He has reduced external threat input, and he has removed internal performance pressure. He has, in effect, begun to bring the body out of defense and toward safety. And only then, into that changing state, does he begin to teach the words. The order is not decorative. It is functional. You prepare the ground before you plant, and Jesus prepared the state of the person, carefully and deliberately, before he gave them anything at all to say. Keep this in mind as we go, because every movement that follows continues the same work, guiding a human being step by careful step out of survival and into the place where trust is finally possible. Let us look closely now at that first movement, the closed door, because it is far more than a suggestion about privacy. Jesus says, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. On the surface, it sounds like advice about avoiding distraction. Underneath, it is one of the most precise regulation instructions imaginable. Consider what the closed door actually does to a human nervous system. First, it removes the audience. And the presence of an audience, real or imagined, is one of the most reliable activators of the human threat response. The moment we sense that we are being watched and evaluated, the body subtly shifts into a state of self-monitoring. Am I performing well? Am I being judged? How do I appear? This is a mild but constant stress state, And it is the exact state that so much of modern life keeps us in. Jesus removes it in a single instruction. Close the door. No audience. No evaluation. No performance. Nothing to manage. The part of you that was braced to be seen can finally stand down. Second, the closed door reduces sensory input. In a state of chronic stress, the nervous system is flooded with signals, sounds, notifications, movement, the pull of 100 unfinished things. Each one is a small demand, and the body reads accumulated demand as pressure, and pressure as threat. When you close the door and put the phone beyond reach, you are not simply being polite to God. You are lowering the volume of the very inputs that keep your system in alarm. You are giving an overstimulated nervous system what it desperately needs and rarely gets: a reduction in incoming signals. And here is where it becomes remarkable. Jesus then says something that any student of the nervous system would find striking. He says, "Your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees in secret." In other words, in this closed room, you are not unwatched in a frightening way. You are watched in a safe way. You are alone but not abandoned. And that distinction is everything to a human body, because total isolation is itself a threat state. Humans are wired to feel safest not in complete solitude, but in the presence of a safe other. What Jesus describes is precisely that paradoxical and healing combination: the removal of the threatening audience and the presence of a safe, loving witness. You lose the eyes that judge and keep the eyes that love. For a nervous system, that is the definition of a secure base, the psychological and physiological condition under which a human being can finally relax, explore, and be honest. Now think about what usually happens the moment the external noise decreases. The internal noise gets louder. This is why silence is so uncomfortable for so many people. The instant the phone is away and the room is quiet, the mind fills with everything it was outrunning. The unfinished conversation. The worry about tomorrow. The old regret. People experience this and conclude that they are bad at prayer, that they cannot focus, that something is wrong with them. But from the perspective of the nervous system, something entirely different is happening. The noise was always there. The activity was covering it. When you remove the distraction, you are not creating the inner turbulence, you are finally hearing what your system has been carrying underneath all along. This is not failure. This is the beginning of regulation, the moment the material that needed attention finally rises to where it can be met. What felt like the prayer going wrong is actually the prayer beginning to work. And Jesus gives the method for meeting it, not with force, not by fighting each thought, but by returning gently again and again to the awareness of the Father who is already present. This returning, this soft repeated redirection of attention, is itself one of the most well-documented ways to calm an activated nervous system. You do not win against intrusive thoughts by battling them. You loosen their grip by repeatedly, kindly bringing your attention back to a point of safety. Jesus built that exact practice into the very first movement of prayer. So before a single word of the Lord's Prayer is spoken, the person praying has already been guided to remove the judging audience, reduce the sensory flood, establish the presence of a safe witness, and begin the gentle practice of returning attention. That is not merely spiritual preparation. That is, in the most literal sense, the preparation of a nervous system to move from defense into safety. The closed door was never only about privacy. It was about creating the one internal condition in which real trust becomes possible. You cannot force a frightened system to feel safe, but you can change the conditions around it until safety becomes available. That is what the closed door does. It is the first and most physical act of regulation in the entire prayer, and everything that follows depends on it. Now the words begin, and notice where Jesus starts. Not with the problem, not with the request, not with the fear that drove the person to pray in the first place. He starts with two words that establish relationship. Our Father. And this order, relationship before request, is not a spiritual nicety. It is neurologically strategic, and it works directly against the instinct of a frightened brain. When a human being is in distress, the nervous system pulls attention toward the threat. The mind fixates on the problem, the danger, the thing that is wrong. This is survival doing its job. A threatened animal does not pause to reflect on relationships, it narrows onto the danger. So the natural, untrained way to pray, the way most of us actually pray when we are afraid, is to lead with the crisis. Fix this. Remove that. Help me now. And there is nothing wrong with bringing our needs to God. But notice that Jesus does not begin there, because beginning there keeps the nervous system locked onto the threat. Instead, he redirects attention immediately toward relationship and safety. Our Father. Before the problem is named, the mind is turned toward a source of care, connection, and belonging. And this matters enormously to the body, because connection is one of the most powerful regulators of the human nervous system that exists. The felt sense of being in relationship with a safe, caring presence does something measurable. It calms the threat response. It signals to the body that you are not alone against the danger, and a body that is not alone against the danger does not need to stay in full alarm. This is why the single most effective thing you can do for a distressed child is not to explain the situation, but to hold them, to let them feel the presence of a safe caregiver. The relationship itself regulates, more than any explanation or reassurance ever could. Jesus opens prayer by invoking exactly that. Not a distant force, not an abstract power, a father, a relationship before anything else. And then he adds a second word that does something equally precise. Our. Not my Father. Our Father. In a survival state, the world shrinks to the self. My problem, my fear, my survival. This narrowing is natural under threat, but it also intensifies the sense of isolation, and isolation deepens the alarm. The word our gently widens the frame. You are not the only one. You are part of something larger. Others are held by the same Father. This expansion, this reminder of belonging to a wider human family, pulls the nervous system further out of the tight, isolated, self-protective state that fear creates. In one short phrase, Jesus has redirected attention from threat to relationship, and from isolation to belonging, both of which are among the most powerful ways to bring a body out of defense. Then comes in heaven, hallowed be your name. And here Jesus adds reverence, which does something subtle and important to an anxious mind. Reverence requires the recognition of something larger than yourself, and the moment you genuinely perceive something greater than your own crisis, the crisis loses its total grip on your attention. This is not denial of the problem. It is proportion. A nervous system stuck in survival experiences the immediate threat as the entire universe, filling the whole field of awareness. Reverence gently breaks that spell. It says, before we deal with what is urgent, remember what is holy. Remember the vastness in which this problem sits. And when a person authentically shifts from their small, panicked frame into an awareness of something transcendent, the physiological grip of panic begins to loosen. This is why awe has such a powerful effect on the human body, why standing before something vast, an ocean, a mountain, a night sky, so reliably quiets the inner noise. Reverence gently breaks the spell of the small panicked frame. The problem does not disappear, but it stops being infinite. It returns to its actual size. Notice the sequence so far and how deliberate it is. Safe environment, then relationship, then belonging, then reverence. Each step moves the nervous system further from the narrow, isolated, threat-locked state, and further into the open, connected, regulated state where trust and clarity live. Jesus has not yet asked for a single thing. He has spent the entire opening of the prayer changing the internal condition of the person praying, because he understood, in whatever language his understanding took, that a request made from panic and a request made from trust come from two completely different states of being, and only one of them can actually be received. The frightened request grabs. The trusting request opens. And Jesus spends the entire opening of the prayer moving the person from the first state into the second, so that when the needs finally come, they can be brought to God by a person who is actually able to receive an answer. The next movement is the one most people find hardest, and it is also the one that reveals most clearly why this prayer is a work of regulation. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. This is the movement of surrender, and surrender is difficult for a very specific reason that the nervous system explains perfectly. At the root of most chronic stress is the need for control. When a human being feels unsafe, the survival mind responds by trying to control everything it can, the outcome, the timeline, the behavior of others, the future. Control feels like safety. If I can just manage every variable, anticipate every outcome, prepare for every scenario, then nothing bad can happen. The mind promises the body that enough vigilance will finally make it safe. But the promise is a lie because the list of things to control has no end, and the vigilance never gets to stop. This is exhausting and it is impossible, and the effort to control the uncontrollable is one of the deepest sources of ongoing anxiety a person can carry. The nervous system that is always trying to control is a nervous system that can never rest, because the moment it releases its grip, it feels the danger rushing back in. Now hear what surrender actually is, seen through this lens. Your will be done is not passive resignation, and it is not defeat. It is the conscious release of the exhausting demand to control everything. And that release, when it is real, does something profound to the body. It ends the impossible war. It sets down a weight the nervous system was never designed to carry indefinitely. There is a reason people so often weep at the moment of genuine surrender, and it is not only emotional, it is physiological. The body is finally releasing a chronic bracing it has held for months or years. The muscles that were clenched around the need to manage everything begin to let go. The jaw softens. The shoulders drop. The breath deepens without being told to. This is why Jesus places surrender before need. Your will be done comes before give us this day our daily bread. Because a request made from a state of desperate control is a very different thing from a request made from a state of trust. The first keeps the nervous system in alarm, gripping, insisting, bracing for the outcome. The second releases the body into the care of something larger, and only in that release state can a person actually receive rather than merely grab. And notice how honest this movement is, because this is crucial. Jesus does not teach that surrender means pretending you have no desires or feelings. The clearest example is his own prayer in the garden, facing enormous suffering, where he first says plainly, "Let this cup pass from me," naming exactly what he wants and fears, and only then says, "Yet not my will but yours." Both are present in the same breath. The honest naming of the desire, and the release of control over the outcome. This is enormously important for the nervous system because suppression, pretending you do not feel what you feel, is itself a stress state. It keeps the body in tension. But naming a fear or desire honestly out loud to a safe presence, and then releasing your grip on the outcome, is one of the most regulating things a human being can do. You are not stuffing the feeling down. You are bringing it into the light, letting it be witnessed, and then setting down the impossible burden of forcing the result. That full sequence, name it, feel it, release it, is almost a perfect description of how emotional material gets processed and discharged in a regulated nervous system, rather than staying stuck and activating. So surrender, far from being weakness, is the moment the prayer does its deepest physiological work. It is where the chronic grip of control, the very engine of so much anxiety, is consciously loosened. It is where the body is invited to stop defending and start trusting. And here is the quiet paradox that both the mystics and the nervous system agree on. The control you are so afraid to release was never actually keeping you safe. It was keeping you exhausted. The bracing did not prevent the danger. It only guaranteed that you never rested. And when you finally say with your whole being, "Your will be done," and mean it, what floods in is not the catastrophe you feared. What floods in is the relief you did not know you were allowed to feel. That relief is not an accident. It is the body recognizing, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that it is safe enough to let go. And once a nervous system has tasted that release, even briefly, it begins to learn that surrender is not the danger it always feared. Surrender is the doorway to the rest it has been starving for. And this is the strange gift buried in the hardest movement of the prayer. The thing you were most afraid to release turns out to be the thing that was hurting you most to hold. After surrender comes provision. Give us this day our daily bread. And this small request contains one of the most powerful antidotes to anxiety ever spoken. Because of a single word. Today. Think about where anxiety actually lives. It almost never lives in the present moment. In this exact second, reading or hearing these words, you are, in all likelihood, physically fine. The threat that grips you is almost always located somewhere else in time. It is in tomorrow, in next month, in a future scenario your mind is rehearsing. Anxiety is, in large part, the nervous system responding to imagined futures as though they were present realities. Your body cannot tell the difference between a catastrophe that is actually happening and a catastrophe you are only vividly imagining. To the nervous system, a rehearsed disaster and a real one release the same chemistry, produce the same tension, cost the same energy. You can exhaust yourself completely on a catastrophe that never comes, paying its full price in advance for nothing. So when your mind projects into tomorrow's disaster, your body floods with today's stress chemistry, reacting to an event that does not exist yet and may never exist at all. This is the exhausting trick of chronic worry. It taxes the body with the weight of 100 futures, almost none of which arrive. Now hear what Jesus does with a single word. Daily bread. This day. He does not teach you to pray, give me certainty about the next 10 years. He does not teach you to secure the entire future in advance. He anchors the request to today, to this day, to the portion of life actually in front of you. And this is precisely what a nervous system caught in future-oriented anxiety most needs, to be brought back to the present, where it is almost always safer than the imagined future suggests. There is deep wisdom here that the body confirms. When you return your attention to today, to what is actually needed and actually present right now, you leave the realm of imagined threat and re-enter the realm of the real. And in the real present moment, the survival system can finally get accurate information. Not the fabricated danger of a rehearsed future, but the actual conditions of now, which are, in this moment, survivable. You are breathing. You are here. The catastrophe your body was bracing for is not occurring. This return to the present is one of the foundational tools for calming an anxious nervous system, and Jesus built it directly into the prayer. Give us this day. Not every day in advance. Not a guaranteed and fully controlled future. This one. The day you are actually living, the only day your body was ever designed to inhabit. The nervous system was never built to carry a lifetime at once. It was built for one day, one challenge, one moment at a time, and it heals when it is finally allowed to live that way again. Consider also what the request implies about trust. To ask only for today's bread is to trust that tomorrow will have its own provision. It is to release the compulsion to stockpile certainty, to hoard against every possible future. And that compulsion to secure the future completely is itself a symptom of a nervous system that does not feel safe. The person who feels fundamentally unsafe can never have enough, because no amount of stored security ever quiets the underlying alarm. There is always another future to defend against. Always one more scenario that has not been secured. The alarm is not coming from the outside world. It is coming from within, and no amount of external security can reach it. Jesus interrupts this endless accumulation with the discipline of enough for today. And notice again the word us. Give us this day our daily bread. Even here, in the request for basic provision, the frame stays connected, communal, relational. Not give me, hoard for me, secure me alone against a hostile world, but give us, hold us, provide for this whole family of which I am a part. The prayer will not let the nervous system collapse back into the isolated, self-protective crouch that fear wants. Even our needs are held inside relationship. So this small line does two things the body deeply needs. It pulls attention out of the imagined, threatening future and back into the survivable present, and it invites the release of the exhausting compulsion to secure everything in advance. It teaches the nervous system to trust that this day has enough, and that the next day will be met when it comes, and that you do not have to carry all your tomorrows at once in a body built to carry only one day at a time. Then the prayer moves into what may be its most physically liberating movement. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And to understand why this is neurological and not merely moral, you have to understand what unforgiveness actually does inside a body. When someone harms us and we hold on to that harm, replaying it, rehearsing it, keeping the account open, we are not simply having a thought. We are repeatedly reactivating the stress response. Every time the mind returns to the injury, the body responds almost as if the harm is happening again, right now. The same threat chemistry releases. The same tension grips. The muscles brace. The heart rate climbs. Resentment, held over time, is not a passive emotional state. It is a chronic, low-grade activation of the survival system, running in the background day after day, sometimes for years. In a very real sense, unforgiveness keeps the person who hurt you living inside your nervous system, still triggering your alarm long after the event itself has ended. This is why the old saying that resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer is more literally true than people realize. The one who carries the resentment is the one whose body pays the price, in sustained stress, in disrupted sleep, in elevated pressure, in the slow wear of chronic activation on every system it touches. Now hear what forgiveness actually is through this lens. Forgiveness is not saying that what happened was acceptable. It is not pretending the harm did not occur. And it is not necessarily reconciliation or the restoration of trust. Forgiveness, at the level of the nervous system, is the release of the ongoing internal activation attached to the wound. It is the decision to stop letting the injury keep triggering your survival system in the present. It is, quite literally, the removal of a chronic stressor from your own body. When Jesus teaches us to release the debts of others, he is not only teaching a moral good. He is prescribing the removal of one of the most persistent sources of internal stress a human being can carry. And notice the profound reciprocity in the line. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. There are two directions of release here, and the body needs both. The first is releasing what others owe you, the resentment you carry outward. The second is receiving release for what you owe, the guilt and shame you carry inward. And guilt, unresolved, is its own chronic activation. The nervous system of a person trapped in shame is a nervous system under a constant, quiet assault, a persistent internal signal that says you are bad, you are wrong, you are unworthy. This too keeps the body in a defensive, contracted state. To receive genuine forgiveness, to actually let the weight of guilt be lifted rather than carried indefinitely, is to remove another sustained stressor from the system. So this single movement of the prayer addresses two of the heaviest chronic activators the human body carries: resentment held toward others and shame held against the self, and it releases them both. Now here is something the nervous system makes clear that pure willpower misses. You often cannot simply decide to forgive in an instant and have it be complete. Deep wounds do not release on command, and Jesus, understood rightly, does not demand that they do. Forgiveness is frequently a practice repeated over time, a decision returned to again and again as the activation rises and is met and released, a little more each time. This is exactly how the nervous system actually discharges deep stress, not in a single dramatic act, but through repeated, gradual return, meeting the material as it surfaces, releasing another layer, until the grip finally loosens. To pray forgive us our debts is to begin, and to keep beginning, the work of removing from your own body the accumulated weight of every account you have been holding open. It is one of the most physiologically freeing things a human being can do, and Jesus placed it near the very center of how to pray, because a nervous system still gripping every old wound cannot fully arrive at peace, no matter how sincere the rest of the prayer. You can close the door, remember the Father, surrender your will, and return to the present, and still remain activated if your body is quietly at war with everyone who hurt you and with yourself for what you regret. The old accounts keep the alarm running. Forgiveness closes them. And notice that Jesus does not present this as optional or advanced. He places it in the short, essential core of the prayer, right alongside daily bread, as though releasing the past were as basic to human well-being as food. In a sense, it is. A body cannot flourish while carrying the sustained chemistry of resentment and shame any more than it can flourish while starving. Both wear the system down, and both are addressed directly in this single deliberate line. The prayer ends where a regulated nervous system is finally ready to look at the reality of danger, without being controlled by it. Let us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And the placement of this movement at the very end rather than the beginning is itself the deepest lesson of all. Think about how a frightened person prays. They begin with the danger. Protect me, save me, keep the threat away. Fear leads and everything else follows from it. This is survival doing what survival does, putting the threat first, making it the center of everything. But notice that Jesus does not begin here. He does not open the prayer with "protect me from evil." He arrives at it last only after the entire nervous system has been walked step by step out of survival and into safety. And that order changes everything about how the reality of danger is met. Consider the difference. To confront the possibility of temptation, harm, and evil from a state of panic is to be overwhelmed by it. In a survival state, threat fills the entire field of awareness, it becomes infinite, it becomes the whole world, and the person is consumed by fear. But to confront that same reality from a regulated state, after relationship has been established, after belonging has been remembered, after surrender has released the grip of control, after the present moment has been reclaimed and the old wounds set down, is an entirely different experience. Now the danger is real, but it is not infinite. It sits inside a larger reality of safety, relationship, and trust. The person acknowledges the threat without being swallowed by it. This is what psychological health actually looks like. Not the absence of any awareness of danger, which is denial, and not the domination of the mind by danger, which is anxiety, but the accurate perception of real threat from within a fundamental sense of safety. That is precisely the state Jesus has been building, movement by movement, and only now from within it Does he teach the person to name the danger? Let us not into temptation. And notice what this request actually is neurologically. It is not bravado. It is not the overconfidence of someone who believes they are too strong to fall. It is the humble, clear-eyed recognition that we are vulnerable, that under certain conditions our judgment weakens, that we are wise to ask for guidance around the places where we are likely to stumble. This is self-awareness, not self-reliance. And self-awareness, the honest knowledge of one's own patterns and weak points, is a mark of a regulated, mature nervous system, not a panicked one. A person in survival mode cannot see their own patterns clearly. They are too busy reacting, too flooded, too consumed by the immediate threat to observe themselves with any honesty or distance. Only from a settled body can a person study their own weak points calmly, in advance, before the pressure arrives. Only from a settled state can a person say honestly, here is where I am weak, here is where I tend to fall, lead me away from that path before I reach it. Then deliver us from evil. And here the prayer places the final weight not on the person's own strength, but on rescue, on dependence, on being delivered. This is the opposite of the exhausting self-reliance that keeps so many nervous systems in perpetual defense. The person who believes they must face every danger alone, by sheer force of their own vigilance, can never rest, because the responsibility for their own survival never leaves their shoulders. To ask to be delivered is to lay that impossible burden down, to acknowledge that you are held by something larger than your own capacity to protect yourself. And for a nervous system, that acknowledgement, I am not alone against the danger I am held, is one of the deepest sources of safety a human being can know. So the prayer that began by closing a door to remove the audience ends by opening the whole of life to a protection greater than the self. And between those 2 points, a complete journey has taken place. A journey the body recognizes even when the mind has no words for it. From performance to secrecy, from isolation to belonging, from urgency to reverence, from control to surrender, from the imagined future to the present day, from resentment to release, from vigilant self-reliance to being held. Every single movement carries the nervous system one step further out of survival, and one step further into safety. That is not a coincidence, and it is not something modern science invented and imposed onto an ancient text. It was already there, waiting, in the exact order Jesus gave 2,000 years before anyone had the language to explain why it works. The sequence was whole and complete from the very beginning. We are only now catching up to what it was always doing, and the more precisely we learn to measure the human stress response, the more astonishing the accuracy of that ancient order becomes. So let us gather all of this together, because what emerges is genuinely remarkable. The way Jesus taught people to pray is, from beginning to end, a precise sequence for moving a human being out of survival and into safety, out of fear and into trust, out of the narrow, gripping, isolated state of chronic stress and into the open, connected, regulated state where peace and clarity become physically possible. It begins by closing the door, removing the judging audience and the sensory flood while keeping the presence of a safe, loving witness, the exact conditions a nervous system needs to begin releasing its defenses. It establishes relationship before request, turning attention from threat to connection, which is one of the most powerful regulators the body has. It widens the frame from my to our, pulling the person out of the isolation that deepens alarm. It introduces reverence, restoring proportion so the crisis is no longer infinite. It moves into surrender, consciously releasing the exhausting grip of control that drives so much anxiety. It anchors provision in today, pulling the mind out of the imagined, threatening future and back into the survivable present. It releases debts, removing the chronic activation of resentment and shame from the body. And it ends, only after all of that, by facing danger from a place of established safety, naming vulnerability with clear eyes and laying down the impossible burden of protecting oneself alone. This is not to say that prayer is merely a nervous system technique. I want to be careful here because the point is not to shrink the sacred down to biology. The point is almost the opposite. The point is that the sacred and the biological are not at war. What Jesus taught works on the soul, and it also works on the body because a human being is not a soul trapped in a machine, but a whole integrated creature, and truth that reaches the depths tends to reach every level at once. That the way of prayer he taught also happens to be one of the most sophisticated descriptions of nervous system regulation ever recorded is not a reduction of its meaning. It is a confirmation of its depth. It suggests that the one who taught it understood the human being completely, body and soul together, long before we had the instruments to measure what was happening inside. So what do you do with this? You slow down. You stop reciting the prayer like a phone number and start moving through it like the journey it actually is. You let each movement do its work. You close the door and actually let the audience fall away. You say Our Father and actually let yourself feel connection before you rush to the request. You let reverence restore proportion. You let surrender loosen the grip. You let today be enough, and you let tomorrow wait its turn. You let the old debts go, again and again if you must, as many times as the activation returns. And you face what you fear from within the safety the whole sequence has built, rather than leading with the fear. When you pray this way, slowly, in order with your whole self, you may notice something you have never noticed before. Your breathing has slowed. Your shoulders have come down. The frantic quality has left your words. Something in you has come down out of alarm. That is not a distraction from the spiritual reality of prayer. It may be part of the evidence of it, the body agreeing with the soul, the whole person coming into alignment in the presence of God. If this way of understanding prayer has opened something for you, write the words "Teach me to pray" in the comments, not as a performance, but as a marker of the posture you are choosing to return with. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring this territory where the teachings of Jesus meet what we are learning about the mind, the body, and the soul, because everything on this channel lives right here at that meeting place. And save this video because you will want to return to it slowly the next time you pray, and let the ancient sequence do in your body what it was always designed to do. The method was never hidden. It was waiting in the words you already knew, in a prayer you may have recited since childhood, for you to move through it slowly enough to feel what it was doing all along. You do not need a new prayer. And you do not need a secret technique that someone kept from you. You need only to return to the one you were given and to stop rushing. Say it one movement at a time, letting each step settle before you take the next. Close the door and mean it. Turn toward the Father and feel it. Let surrender loosen the grip. Let today be enough. Let the debts go. And face what you fear from inside the safety the whole prayer has built. Do this, and the prayer that once felt like empty repetition may become the most grounding few minutes of your day. A doorway back to yourself and back to God. That is what was always waiting inside those familiar words all along.